Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I am going to be covering the weather for June 11th of 2023 and the rest of this week because this week is a weekly overlook. Currently for today, we do have an enhanced risk issued for a large portion of Tennessee into Arkansas, northern Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Georgia, and Kentucky, as well as a pretty large slight risk around that going all the way into Texas, as well as for majority of Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Georgia, and Kentucky into Ohio and Indiana. There is also another slight risk further out west for part of the Colorado region going into the Oklahoma Panhandle and into a little bit of New Mexico, as well as a marginal threat that I probably won't touch on too much back towards Nevada and parts of western Utah. As for our threats today, we do have a 2% tornado threat for the enhanced risk area and a 2% for that slight risk area. We do have a 30% wind threat for the enhanced risk area, on a 15% for that slight risk area, as well as a 15% back towards that other slight risk area, as well as a 5% for the Nevada to Utah region. And then we do have almost a nearly identical hail threat with a hatch significant threat back towards Texas and a hatch significant threat for the southern reaches of that slight risk there. Taking a look at the pivotal weather models, this will show us our triggers for severe weather across much of the United States for today, and then I'll also show you guys the triggers for severe weather development later on this week, but I'm going to be focusing on mostly today from now until halfway through the video. For severe weather today, we do have a little bit of a impulse here with in the mid-level flow of 40 knots to 30 knots, which is going to be the main trigger for severe weather back towards the enhanced risk region. This is going to provide a little bit of wind shear to help fuel that tornado potential, but because of kind of how weak it is going to stay mostly around the 2% area. Back towards the slight risk further out west, we do have a little bit of an impulse as well right before the jet stream becomes really strong, which is expected to happen around tomorrow into Tuesday. This is going to also again provide ample wind shear for not only very large hail, but also that 2% tornado threat depending on our cape. Continuing forward, we do have that low pressure system that you may have noticed further up north around Michigan, the Great Lakes area. This is going to help probably increase wind shear a little bit to the east, as well as help interact with that boundary and develop severe weather development towards that enhanced risk area. It's only going to aid, not really going to do a whole lot, but it is there and potentially going to, again, help aid severe weather development. But this low pressure system is situated around California in southern Las Vegas. That is going to possibly increase and push forward, help that jet stream get around the Oklahoma and Texas area, trigger severe weather development across that region, boost it forward, as well as use this low pressure system here to help push it along. But because of how strong this jet stream is, it is expected to not only trigger severe weather development for the next few days and potentially the entire week, as well as trigger tornado potentials going into much of this week as well. This is going to provide very strong wind shear, and I'll show you guys that later, but I am going to again focus mostly on today's weather. Taking a look at our 700 millibars, I don't really do this a lot, but there is something noticeable that I will cover. You can see this shortwave trough that is moving through the enhanced risk region. It is really strong with wind flow in the 40 knots to possibly the 50 knots in some very small regions. 50 knots is probably not going to be all that realistic, but it is definitely possible in some regions further in Kentucky and northern Tennessee. But this shortwave trough, and with how strong it is going to help trigger severe weather development with that jet stream that's moving through the region, as well as provide low-level wind shear and mid-level wind shear, and really help with tornadic potential, as well as hail potential a little bit too. But this is the only region that we see notable strong low-level flow, so that's why I'm only really covering it for today and for that region. But this is going to help aid in, again, the low-based rotating supercells, embedded supercells. We do have a linear mode for our storms today, but this is going to help with aid with low-level wind shear, as well as overall help trigger severe weather development back towards this region. Taking a look at our dew points, you can already see that we do have tons of moisture for the regions that are expecting severe weather development, except for not really so much back towards this region, but we do have dew points in the 70s for that slight risk region in Texas. And as well as dew points in the mid to upper 60s back through central to eastern Tennessee to help aid with instability. With whatever lapse rates we have, we could get tons of instability in this large humidity plume. Taking a look at our lapse rates, let's focus on the Texas region for now, where we can actually see notable, very strong and sufficient lapse rates. These steeper lapse rates, mostly in the moderates, not really so much in the high, steeper lapse rates, but lapse rates with 7s and 6. With that very deep moisture, we could potentially see Cape values upwards of 3,000. I'll show you guys the instability, but when I was making my written forecast, it was absolutely insane. But then let's take a look back towards Tennessee. We don't really have really strong lapse rates, just a little bit in the weaker 6s. This is possibly going to inhibit instability just a little bit, not really get it up to as strong as it possibly could, but it will definitely generate some instability that will be sufficient enough for some large hail. And let's take a look at the slight risk back towards Colorado and into the Oklahoma Panhandle. We do have fairly strong lapse rates, mostly in the 6s to 7s, possibly the 8s in some regions, but it's right on the boundary between the 9s. So with whatever dew points in the 50s, we could possibly see probably some 2,700 range, but that's mostly what we're looking at for our lapse rates for today. Now let's take a look at the instability, and I will show you guys why I am absolutely blown away, and that mostly lies in Texas. But for now, let's focus on the enhanced risk region for the Tennessee area. We do have an expectation for around 2 rounds of severe weather, one being sort of isolated and then the other being linear. So any cape that we would have to see that will contribute to large hail as well as our tornado threat will have to be ahead of that line, but mostly tornadoes are going to be possible for that second line. But then let's take a closer look. You can see that because of those weaker lapse rates, this instability is going to stay mostly around the moderates, the 1,000 to 2,000 range. Not really all that much in the 2,000s, but definitely possible. This is going to contribute to tornado threat and very large hail threat with whatever wind shear we have. But then let's take a look at Texas. You can probably already see tons of instability, absolutely insane. You can see Cape values that are in the 5,000s, the mid 5,000s, even the 6,000s in a little pocket for that slight risk area. This is going to be mostly broken away from the main severe weather development back towards Tennessee. I am going into more of a zoomed in view here so you guys can get a better look, a closer look at the instability plume for that slight risk area, and it just blows me away. We can definitely see Cape values that could potentially reach the mid 5,000s, maybe the 6,000s in some very small regions, but I mean it's mostly in the simulated values in such a small area that it doesn't really seem all that likely, but definitely possible, and we could definitely see Cape values that reach the 4,000s and possibly even the low to mid 5,000s, maybe the upper 5,000s in the regions that we're seeing those 6,000s. But this just blows me away because with whatever wind shear we have, with that jet stream moving through the area, we can see very large hail throughout much of this area. Let's take a look at wind shear, starting off the Tennessee region where we have that fairly large 2% in that enhanced risk area. We do have that first line of storms mostly going to affect eastern Tennessee. There isn't a whole lot of wind shear ahead of that first line, so we don't really have all that much of a tornado potential going forward with that, but we could definitely see some embedded rotation with that. But then we do have that second line of storms behind that, which is going to, for the most part, affect the Tennessee region, which is going to trigger that 2% and enhanced risk area. You can see ahead of this line we have very strong wind shear. This very strong wind shear with the moderate cape is going to possibly inhibit our tornado potential a little bit, but this wind shear is definitely going to be sufficient enough for some very large hail to develop with cape values that we have, as well as the possibility of some embedded tornadoes with this. Even if cape is a little low, it is definitely sufficient enough for some tornadic development, but is definitely keeping it mostly in the 2% and not letting it get up to possibly 5%. because of the cape values, but if we have stronger cape, it could definitely possibly get up to a 5% with wind shear like this. So keep a head out for this as it goes into the afternoon and possibly even overnight through Kentucky, northern regions of Mississippi, Alabama, and for the majority of middle Tennessee to eastern Tennessee. Let's then take a look at wind shear for that western slight risk region in the Colorado area. We don't really have all that much of a strong, notable place of wind shear. However, you can see that outflow boundary going into that 2% region of the Oklahoma Panhandle into Colorado and New Mexico. There is a little bit of wind shear ahead of that. However, it does look fairly weak with very weak cape and this wind shear. We do have, again, a 2% tornado threat, but it definitely does look like it's going to be on more of the weaker end of the 2% tornado threats because of how overall weak cape is and how overall weak wind shear is. We don't have that shortwave trough that is moving through the area back towards Tennessee that we have here. We don't have that here. So wind shear is likely going to be mostly decreased for now back towards this region. However, some embedded rotation could be possible and maybe a brief tornado with the cape that we have. But overall, as far as tornado threats go, this 2% is going to be fairly on the weaker side. Taking a look at the weather for the rest of this week, I've already talked about these two low pressure systems right here, which could possibly aid with severe weather development for this week. However, our main trigger for severe weather development is going to be this extremely strong jet stream that increases as we go into Monday and Tuesday as well as Wednesday. This low pressure system right here could potentially boost along that jet stream and help with wind shear a little bit, but mid-level flow in the 50 knots could definitely bring very strong wind shear across Texas and Oklahoma and trigger severe weather development. That's mostly going to be our trigger, severe weather development, as well as very strong wind shear. Even right here in this low pocket, we can see simulated values of the mid 60 knots to the upper 60 knots, which is going to provide really strong wind shear for much of this week. And you can see that this persists, triggering severe weather development as well as tornado threats for much of this week. Now let's take a look at the dew points and how they might affect our instability a little bit for much of this week. You can see that further down south, mostly in the Texas region, that jet stream is kind of passing through this area right here. So that's mostly where we're going to look for strong dew points, but it does look overall very strong. We get dew points that are in the 70s to mid to upper 60s for much of the region, which is going to provide or trigger very strong instability depending on lapse rates, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But that is mostly what's going to happen as far as dew points go and how it might contribute to our instability a little bit. But you can see what looks like possibly multiple dry lines develop between dew points in the 20s and 30 knots to the mid to upper 60 knots, even the 70 knots. So that's going to be a really strong aiding factor for severe weather development in Texas, as well as overall much of the southern region of the United States, central to southern area, as that jet stream continues. Let's take a look at our lapse rates and how they might affect our dew points a little bit and contribute to our instability. Let's focus kind of in the Texas region a little bit, where we see dew points that are in the mid upper 60s and the 70s for the most part across eastern Texas. But lapse rates do look fairly strong. They do stay mostly in the moderates to low highs, in the 6s to 7s, possibly the 8s on some days. But this is going to really trigger tons of instability. Absolutely tons of instability. We could see instability levels for much of this week that could reach the 3,000s and possibly the 4,000s, maybe even the low 5,000s in some isolated locations. But these lapse rates are really going to contribute to lots of instability with those dew points that we saw. Taking a look at the instability with dew points in the lapse rates, keep in mind the strong jet stream that's moving through the area. We didn't really have all that strong lapse rates further out east. They were mostly in the Texas region, but because of this strong jet stream that's moving through the area, all this very unstable air is going to be pushed further out east by that jet stream and trigger severe weather development further out east. With storms that develop from this very strong instability and this very strong wind shear, we could potentially see tons of tornado potentials for much of this week. I'm expecting a tornado potential for possibly every single day this week, as well as the potential for very large hail as well as strong damaging winds because of all this instability and very strong wind shear. Taking a look at wind shear, keep in mind that very strong jet stream that's moving through the area. We are expecting our wind shear to increase rapidly by tomorrow into Tuesday and linger at very strong levels throughout much of this week and maybe a little bit into early next week as well. We could possibly see very strong wind shear values in the 50 knots to possibly the mid to low 60 knots in some regions of southern Oklahoma and Texas, and possibly into Arkansas as well. This is going to generate tons of tornado potentials, as well as the possibility for very, very large hail. I'm expecting tornado potentials from this wind shear every single day this week, as well as very large hail to develop as well. So keep that in mind going into this week. If you live in Texas and Oklahoma, or any of the region that may be affected by this strong severe weather, please keep a lookout for any tornado potentials, because they are definitely possible this week. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator. Join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator, and hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.